Good evening, everyone.
Howdy.
Good evening to the listeners.
Hello.
Good evening to Timothy and Jeff. Welcome to another fun, action-packed week of, I don't know where I was going with that, but it's good to be here with y'all.
Yeah.
But welcome back to another week of exciting topic and conversation. I sent out a video earlier in the week that I came across that was really compelling and interesting and pretty deep. It was with Tom Campbell and Bruce Lipton. It was titled, "Are We in a Simulated Reality?" And just as a broad stroke, I just thought it was fascinating because these two guys in two different areas of very deep science coming together and sort of commiserating on this idea and contributing both of their expertise to this idea that ultimately this is a simulated reality. Ultimately it's all about energy and that the energy is what drives all of this in various components. And I'm not going to dive into the particulars of it, mostly because I don't remember it all right at this moment. But but it led me to thinking about something that has been kind of remarkable to me particularly over the last year. This idea of how the illusions that are created through the mass consciousness are coming to sort of bubbling up to the surface, and we're getting to see that the things that have been the underpinnings of our culture are all based on illusions. They're all based on stories. They're based on a lot of things that aren't even really true, and yet we, as a collective, as a particularly in the Western culture, I'm sure it's true in other cultures, but I don't have the experience of the other cultures as I do here, that we have evolved this never-ending story of and keep adding to untruths about who we are, what we are, why we are. We've spent a lot of time as this threesome in discussion about who we are and why we're here and where we're going, and part of that, I think, is having to really stop and look at how the mass consciousness is affecting everyone's perceptions, how it sort of it builds this sort of armor of fear around people that keeps them from being able to see clearly their place in the world and our place in the world, in the sense that I think the one that comes immediately to mind, and there's a million, and we'll reference a bunch of them over the course of this conversation, but things like the stories of Christopher Columbus, that is the cornerstone of what we built this country on. The man never made it to this country. And not only did he not make it to this country, he was a horrible human being. He was a mass murderer. He was a lot of things that are just deplorable type things that and yet we have a holiday that celebrates him, and we have a whole history built around a complete fabrication, and that it's taught in our schools, it's retaught, it's retrained, it's worshipped every year, in the sense that everybody kind of comes together to talk about this great man who discovered America and all the good things he did, and we
do well with myths.
Yeah,
it's part of our survival.
So why? What is? I wonder what that's about. Well, I mean, part of it is power. I mean, part of it is just like the Bible. I mean, it's a bunch of people who get together, create a story that focuses people in the direction they want them to be focused in, and then builds a story or a myth that enables them to maintain power and control. The challenge, and part of the reason that I'm a little reluctant in this conversation, only because I'm not a conspiracy theory guy. That's not. I don't play there very much because I don't. But there's a line between conspiracy theories and the reality that shit's made up. And where do you go with that?
Well, what would make something a conspiracy?
What would make something a conspiracy?
Because wouldn't the Columbus story actually be a conspiracy?
Well, the conspiracy is what created the story. The conspiracy were the people who came together and conspired to create this nonsense,
Right?
and then say this is what we have to teach everyone and everything
By
about.
definition, it's a conspiracy.
It's a good point. That
Because
is a
there
good point.
was a conspiring that took place of
Yeah.
a distortion of truth, and
Well-
with an agenda behind it.
Very interesting for you to say that, because what I recognized immediately in answering that question was another facet of the same problem, which is if you are a conspiracy theorist, you're somehow on the fringe,
You nut job.
and you're a nut job. Yeah, and so
You're
I find that
tinfoil hat. and-
I'm resisting going there because I don't want to be perceived as the nut job. But the reality is just it is what it is, and it could be that would be construed as conspiracy theory, or that I would be. What am I trying to say? Interesting. That's interesting. That's that for me to hear to recognize that that's a knee-jerk reaction to not wanting to be
Sure.
perceived in a way that wouldn't be welcomed.
So what if we just go with the, believe nothing, question everything, and all we really have is our experience to talk about and share, because we can't prove anything. We just nothing is provable.
Well, we can prove the lies. We can prove the things that aren't true. To the degree that we can show that we may not know what the reality is, but we know that's not true. And some of it we know is actually completely
Is
wrong.
it true that we can't prove anything?
Well, not without making some fundamental assumptions, which is really what this video started out with.
Right.
Yeah.
And the two premise assumptions were that we have to agree that consciousness exists and that in some way it is evolving.
Yeah.
But no other assumptions could be made.
Mm-hmm.
Yet most all of our conversations start off, and you guys have called me out on it a couple of times, of wow, how did you get there? That was a big leap.
Yeah.
That was based on an assumption that you guys weren't willing to make, and that's awesome. It was a perfect illustration of how our communication and our attempt to connect, we make these big assumptions. Pointlessly, like what does it change? What does it change? Discussion today with a lady about whether reincarnation is, a reality or not, and it's like, well, what does it really change? Does it change who you think God is? Does it change your experience on the planet? If you've been here before or not? Does it really change anything? It's just a thought, just an idea. Anyway, it's
Eleanor Roosevelt said that she didn't think it was any more bizarre to exist in this lifetime than it would be to consider that she lived in another lifetime. Just didn't really register as a big deal to her. Just the recycling. And to the point of. And by the way, I didn't see the video, so for those listening at home, Timothy here, I. If we say that we can't prove anything, we can prove gravity.
no, you can.
Really?
There are as many people that think that it's magnetism and electricity, that gravity was just the hoax for the myth of mass, and you can't prove that.
But if you
can observe it. If you drop something,
Okay.
you can say,
Yeah.
"Oh, look at that! It went what we call down."
Right.
Down doesn't even exist. There's no such thing as down. It's all relative to.
It's relative to the fact we're in time and space, and so they had to come up with.
But even things like gravity, that it was just something that seemed like it fit, but what if that's really not what it is? And that's kind of what Bruce was talking about a little bit today with it's magnetism, isn't?
and the idea that everything is made of waves and essentially light. That's not a a known. That's still kind of a.
Well, if I understood it, it is discovered, it has been observed,
Right.
but there isn't anything that can be. I mean, it's still why they're still researching, because they can't get to the beginning and they can't get to the end. They can only get to what they observe.
Exactly.
And then when they observe it, it changes.
Yeah. Especially on the quantum level.
Yeah,
It's really
so-
hard to do duplication there.
So it's hard to run the scientific method through that process.
What was so cool, and many times it came up in the video, that here's this lifelong biologist, lifelong physicist, who hadn't really worked together before, coming together, and the film crew was just giddy that they got these two minds together to do this thing. But what the two of them kept coming back to, that they were really willing to like stake their reputation on, was love. We can agree on that energy.
Was fascinating.
Yeah.
That
And
was
it was
the
like
only
you would
constant.
never would have expected that.
No.
Especially from Tom, you know,
Right.
the stoic scientist NASA guy. Right?
I remember
You know?
when he came out and said it's all, and I went, wait, did he really just say that?
Yeah.
Back and look at that again. Yeah, that was fascinating.
And that they were describing what that was, trying to describe it magnetically, energetically, consciously, but not really knowing what it is. Just having an experience with it.
So I'm curious, how do you guys handle, or it doesn't even come up for you? I'm assuming, I'm making an assumption with the question, and that is that you all have experiences of the non-reality of our reality. In particular, as it relates to mass consciousness, as it relates to the things we learn, what we're trained, how we're trained, what we're meant to believe, blah, blah, blah. How do each of you deal with that in your own evolution, in your own process of transformation, in your own process of changing vibration, of learning, of how do you deal with those incongruencies? Is that a word?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Make sure that was a real word.
Can you give an example?
Well, like, let me think here. Where do I want to go with that?
You touched on what I thought might be a good one, with just the way the mass consciousness of religion is.
Yeah.
That's a big one. It affects most of the people on the planet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that there is so much information that shows how the underpinnings of that whole process are made up. And they're really pretty stories, and they're really interesting, engaging stories, but they leave, like if you think about the life of Christ. You know, here's the Savior who comes to the planet and disappears for how many years?
18.
18 years of, we don't know what the fuck he did. He just was gone for a while. You go,
Well,
and
that's the
everybody.
mass consciousness story, but there actually are details of where he was and what he was doing and what was going on, but that's, suppressed
China and
quite
India.
largely. Yeah.
Yeah, because he was studying Eastern philosophy,
Yeah.
right? But that's not what's brought to the front. That's
Right.
not what's ever talked about. It's and
Because if all these sheeple thought they needed to get in a boat or an airplane and go discover what's true for them, kind of thing, that's not the end game for religion. That's too much critical thinking. That's too much empowerment to consider.
But to that point,
Yeah.
that's assuming that religion was created for a useful purpose, other than controlling people, which, from my perspective, is all it was ever designed for.
That's to my point.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was only ever created as a way of managing people, and if you could create a strong enough story that scared them to death and made them think that they
We're always
were
being
beholden,
watched, and
that they would,
yeah,
and it's worked. I mean,
It has worked.
for 2,000 years. It's been quite effective.
yeah.
But to that, because we've touched on the idea about and I know both of you have talked a little bit about your separation from the religious process.
I
And
call it my evolution,
the evolution.
Yeah.
my enlightenment,
Yeah.
outgrowing it.
So what do you how do you deal with that in the context of your own?
And maybe
Experience.
the word deal. How do you?
Well, when the
what's another
illusions-
word?
Okay. How do you integrate?
There we go. Okay.
How do you assimilate
Yeah.
that into? Because there's something, at least as far as I can observe, it seems to be that there's I'm sure there's probably a technical name for this, whatever it is, but it's that point of when you have nothing to replace the current reality, you stay with the current reality because it's better than not having a reality. I know that's called something, but I don't know what it is. So, because there's a point when, and do you guys remember having that experience at that moment? Because I know for me it was a moment, and it's also an evolution, but there's a moment when you get absolutely clear that this is nonsense.
Mm-hmm.
And even though you're having that thought, and simultaneous to having that thought is all of the background noise about but wait, no, it's not all bad. But wait, there's this part that's but this part of the story, I still need this part, even though in the knowing of it. So there's something that attaches us to the need for that story, and so I guess I'm trying to flesh out in your own experiences, how do you deal with that conflict? Because that's a serious rub in the consciousness. That's a serious rub in being able to move forward in consciousness.
I think for me it was just giving myself, when I had exhausted the wisdom of the people who claimed to have it, and they couldn't answer very basic questions that I had. Because if you read the text, it doesn't take very long before there's a lot of I want to say contraindications. That's not what I mean. There's a lot of contradictions that begin showing up, and when we realize that we don't know who wrote these books and when and what hands have touched it and on, it just, for me, I wanted to keep leaning into what I could know, and this idea of the earth, that was the big one for me. It was just how old the earth is and how long humans have been around, and what are all these fossils in the ground. And I literally had people tell me that God put fossils in the ground to test our faith. Mm-hmm. And so when I started hearing that kind of stuff, even at a very young age, I thought, I want these people to like me. I want to be a good boy to my parents and to my grandparents and my Sunday school teacher and on and on. But there was a deep quest for truth, and I just it got me in a lot of trouble. It got me kicked out of Christian school, and I knew the Bible quite well, and that's part of what the problem was, is that I wanted to know it better, and I wanted to know how that transparency and that depiction of this natural world, how do we square the circle of these of all these problems and inconsistencies in the book. So for me, it was getting comfortable with other people being uncomfortable with my desire for truth, and I wasn't being snotty about it. I wasn't being disrespectful about it most of the time, but there was a deep yearning for an understanding. I felt that there was magic, and I wanted to be able to know how to access it. And something about the way it was being presented just felt strange to me. And it actually wasn't until my 30s, and I'm 48 now. It wasn't until my 30s where I started getting a little more bold, because I felt like I was disrespecting my grandparents if if I drew too much of a line in the sand with someone about what I was learning. And I had very patient friends who knew science and knew how to debate. And just because I was a little more impassioned at the time or something, and I knew it to be right because I believed it to be so, that wasn't working for them. And they just give me a gentle smile and point me in the direction of some reading about evolution, about really any of the sciences. For me, if I took a look for too terribly long at any of the sciences, if I got too far into it, it completely blew apart the text of the Bible. All of them: cosmology, anthropology, evolutionary biology. It just and just recognizing how angry and how resistant people were to even wanting to look at that with me, because they knew that if they got some clarity around that, that would start to change their house of cards. And I just began to see that really, really clearly. I've seen it my whole life, but because I was wanting to be a good boy to some people that I really cared about, I stayed in it a lot longer than but I stayed in it just long enough. I'm really grateful that I had that experience, and I can understand and I can really relate with people who are looking at life with these particular pretty heavy set of blinders on. But for me, I just began realizing that I'm not going to solve this with a stick. Can I solve this with a carrot? And can I bring people out into something they may not have understood before about? And so just gentle conversation for me was a great way to, like with my folks, to get them thinking about something. I was visiting them in Texas, and a program came on the History Channel about Noah's Ark. And I asked them about how many species they thought there were on the planet, and how did they get to the polar, how did this 900 or however, well, I don't know, I remember how old he was now, but he was 700, 600 years old, I don't know. How did he get polar bears and marsupials from, like, how did all those guys get to this place, and what did they eat? And there was one hole on the whole boat, and that's where the air came through, that's where all the poop went out. I started having them really think about it. They're like, wow, I've never thought about that before. I've never thought about it. They don't believe in Noah's Ark anymore, nor did they believe in the Adam and Eve story. Where did Adam and Eve's two boys, how did they procreate? Like these things are just really simple little building blocks that if you start, it's like if I got a hold of Jeff's, and I got a hold of a little thread here, and I just started pulling, and just before too long, there wouldn't be anything left of the sweater. And that's giving myself permission to be okay with losing favor in the moment with people, but know that I'm signing up for a greater truth was a big part of how I got going. How about you?
I like what you had to say about it answers Jim's question of why do we hang on to pieces. Maybe we start the unraveling like you were referring to with the sweater, but we don't make a complete exit. It has to be a gradual thing, because it's hard. It's hard to make a paradigm shift. We want to fit in. We really do. And I think that's what's been so wonderful about this experience for me with you guys is our meetings don't require that we have shared beliefs. And we give each other space and grace to come at this from whatever angle and whatever perspective that we're coming at it from, and are just kind of going with it. And maybe it gets a little pushy and shovey on some of our discussions or whatever, but it's at the end of it, I've never ended one of our sessions feeling like we couldn't still be friends, or that we were in jeopardy of not meeting the next week because it got a little edgy or gamey or whatever.
Right.
And I think that to me is the transcendence of what we've been able to accomplish, is it's not necessary that we have to use the same language or the same concepts. That we're just interested in loving each other and gaining from the experiences that all of us have had, and the different perceptions. They're awesome. It's like, God, it would be a boring place if everybody on the planet was just like me and thought the same way and said the same things. I mean, I wouldn't want to be here very long for that. Even though most people would say they would actually like that if you play that all the way through. It's like, because that's kind of what a club is. You dress the same, you say the same thing, you show up and behave the same way. But, man, you get so much sameness together, and it doesn't work.
Other than some sports...
Interesting. That's an interesting direction.
Other than some sports opportunities, being unified with people has been kind of hard for me. Been a little bit challenging.
Yeah.
And I think there's been a lot of people that just thought I was defiant, and that's really not. It's not my spirit to just be defiant for defiance sake. I really crave authenticity, and I think when there is a mass consciousness in something like religion, and critical thinking is out the window, that's one of the more uncomfortable and exhausting kind of environments for me to be around, is when people aren't thinking for themselves and they're not allowing for questions, and you can tell how strong someone's faith is by how they respond to a reasonable question. And I had a really beautiful opportunity with a chiropractor here in San Diego to just crush it with business. And he was sending me a lot of people, and it was just a lovely deal. And then he's a very strong man of faith, Christian faith, and I had a couple questions for him, and he got really fearful and angry, and completely. He wanted to open a business with me. He wanted to fund this really beautiful business. He wanted me to run it, and it's my doubting and me having a question about something. He told me I just needed to pray more.
Oh Lord.
That if I wasn't spending enough time with the Holy Spirit, and that I just needed to pray more, and that some quote from the Bible about how terrible it is to have any doubt, kind of thing. But I thought that was so strange, that here's this guy who just shouts it from the mountaintops, but just on like someone he wanted to have in his life for years and years, to do a really successful business of healing arts. He got so spooked, and what it did is it showed me how thin the ice was that he was standing on, and I didn't feel angry, or I felt a lot of compassion, and I just thought, what a strange place to be, and I think there's a lot of that. It's really, in mass consciousness, it's really easy to stay in just a judgment of anything that doesn't resonate with what the rest of the crew is doing, and that judgment leads to a lot of fear, and that fear leads to a lot of really awful ways of the human spirit to be quelled.
Well, I like what you said, and I think it's very telling, because for me the source of this conversation is about addressing the fear. But I think it's fascinating that our culture has managed to create an indoctrination process that stimulates such a deep sense of unworthiness.
Yes.
That people will sacrifice everything rather than deal with the feeling of unworthiness.
Yeah.
And that comes back to my original question, sort of, which is what keeps people attached? Why do they keep clinging to even a part of the story.
Because if you buy into that brokenness of being born damned, you know, I mean, that's the story right there.
Yeah.
You look at
By
a
virtue
little
of being human.
yes,
you
are a damned.
You're a damned. You are,
yeah, it's
you're less than.
yeah, and you're pretty much screwed. And so if you're broken and you buy into that, you drink that Kool-Aid. What else is going to save your bacon than just a really awesome Sky Daddy that's going to save the bacon? You know,
It's true.
you don't have to peel that onion very far on most people that are all in, and it's you know, it's a strange place for me to think about so many people being, but get them while they're young. The indoctrination happens. They feel like without that they're nothing, and I think that gets into their DNA. I really think they will fight you at the drop of a hat. They'll kill you.
Well, it anchors you. It anchors people to their physical body. It anchors them to, I am only this meat sack that God has breathed life into for this short period that I get to worship Him and hopefully repent myself back to a place of being able to go spend time with Him again. Because otherwise I'm going to go to the other place.
Yeah. Forever.
For eternal damnation.
And let's just think about that for a moment. This benevolent, loving God created these children and put them in the most complex moral dilemma, ethical dilemma that they could possibly have been put in. They had no experience. They were babies in their their time on this planet, and He put this really, out of all the globe, He put them right next to the only thing that could really screw them up, and as a result,
we're talking about
Adam and Eve.
Okay. Garden of Eden. The tree of knowledge of
yes.
all that. Okay.
Omniscience and omnipotence, and this thing just goes off the rails. And I remember hearing this story when I was a kid about after they realized that they had made a mistake and that God was really angry, that they hid from Him, and God was really angry, yet in shame. They covered themselves. They were, together to procreate, and they were suddenly shameful of their bodies. But I remember being a little kid, like first grade, kindergarten, or something like that, and just thinking, wait, they just said that God was upset because He couldn't find them for a spell. And I just thought, He's creating, He's birthing galaxies, and He can't find his only experiment, his big experiment here. Anyway, it's little moments like that just kept adding and adding and adding, get me to a place where I was. But to ask those questions, to be approaching it with that kind of mindset, was not okay, and that added to the fear of not rocking the boat too much, and I think it's just it's a grip that's not really working anymore. That most of the church attendances across the country, it's fading. Why? Because I think we're in an age of knowledge where we can research and find out, is this true? And
I also think, actually, interestingly enough, that I think that is the core of the millennial experience. I was having a really interesting conversation the other day about this, and it really struck me that the reason that millennials are so challenged is because they don't buy the Kool-Aid.
Right.
They think the Kool-Aid tastes like shit, and they're done with it. They're like, this is nasty. Why are you drinking this Kool-Aid? And then, there are other parts of it that may not be useful, but largely they're saying, I don't like Kool-Aid. I don't like to read this stupid book that you're trying to make me read. I don't believe what you're telling me, because what I'm seeing is not what you're telling me.
Mm-hmm.
And you keep trying to tell me, and I'm telling you I'm not buying it, and you don't like that. So now I'm a snowflake, or I'm a whatever the hell it is that they are now. But it's so interesting, and I wanted to kind of come back and push into a little what you were saying about the homogenization, because I would beg to differ that thought. Because and here's why.
Which thought?
The thought that about us all being different, and if we were all the same, it would be boring. And the reality is we can't all be the same. That's beside the point. But even in the microcosm macrocosm idea, that here are three people who are very different individuals from very different backgrounds and different experiences, who may use different language to communicate very similar ideas, but there is nothing same about anything that happens here. And I would actually venture to say that it's actually quite the opposite, that the fear that people have of the homogenization is probably the thing that keeps them from being willing to change, because it's these people sitting here that are having the free thought, or that are having those expansive thought processes that create the tipping point that shift consciousness. And that if you have and I will say that I also have the experience within the metaphysical community of that homogenization experience, where you can go to a group and be in a group of people that are doing that, talk the same, think the same, everything's the same. And if there's dissension, or if there's an energy that doesn't gel with their thought process, they get somehow moved out. I don't think that's any more useful either. I think that's just another version of the mass conscious process. Mm-hmm. It's just got different labels and different words.
Right.
Where when you break free of that mass conscious thing, and what my hope is in this conversation is that we will be able to share in our conversation, but with our listeners too, is how to take that step. How do you start walking into that? How do you start walking into that autonomy of who I am, showing up who I am, and using your language, your thoughts, your feelings, whatever that is, and contributing that to the conversation, or contributing that to the dialogue of evolution and transformation and consciousness expansion, etc., etc. Excuse me. Because I think there's more to it. I think there may be a sense of, well, I want to go back and talk a little more on that. So can you talk more on that piece about the homogenization? I'm calling it homogenization. You called it.
Well, I think
Same.
what got me on that thought thread was you asked a question of why do we hang on to these pieces of the story. We start changing our story, but we still hang on to little pieces of it. And it would be in fear of, I still got to be able to get together with people at Christmas and know the reason for the season. I mean, gosh, can you... I mean, that's the thought process, is I still have to be able to speak enough about it at the right time to be with my family and have this sense that I still fit in. And
so were you being facetious about knowing enough about the reason for the season? Or were you...
It was tongue in cheek.
Okay.
But I mean, there is some seriousness to that. Like, you kind of gotta still pretend that Jesus is the reason for the season.
Do we?
Why do we do that?
I don't know. I don't know if I'm on board.
Well, if you were at home at
right.
Christmas time with your family,
right,
and it was Christmas Eve, and they all wanted to sing Silent Night or something.
Oh, sure.
You'd
Sure.
together and
Absolutely.
do the Kumbaya thing, right?
Yeah, I'll bow my head or I'll respect what's going on, but it doesn't mean that I don't feel like I have to pretend any. I think that's just, and I get your point. To me, that's just a form of respect of when in Rome kind of thing.
Well,
but as far
that's really all I'm saying.
But if someone were to ask you,
because if you're in Rome and you're not, you'll get kicked out. They'll put you in the Colosseum, and you'll be the.
So if someone were to ask you in that moment, what was near and dear and true for you, would you still pretend, or would you come clean?
It just depends on who it was, and if there was, if there was a sense of true, I really want to know, and I'm open.
Curiosity versus judgment kind of thing.
People just want to snipe.
Yeah,
it's
they
like,
do.
I don't want to be a target.
Yeah, exactly.
I'll just keep a zipper on it.
Yeah.
And, it's not. I'm
it's
not
not worth
going
it.
there.
Yeah,
I'm not even going
it's not
there.
worth it.
So this is good. This is to me is an interesting dynamic, because I think that there is a place where, as we grow in our understanding of ourselves and our place in the universe and all of that stuff, I think that there is I think probably to Timothy's point, there's a place of compassion and a balancing act that has to take place a little bit. And again, I'm thinking of this more for people listening to this, going, to your point, how could I even go there if I have to go home and deal with mom and dad and the brothers and sisters who are all praising Jesus, and I'm like, whatever, Well, part of that is you got to be able to go whatever.
Yeah.
The other part of that is you can honor their belief, and your choice of whether you participate is a whole different thing. If you have a solid, if you have a what's the word that I want? Solid is not it. If you have that clarity, or you have that sense of understanding at a different level, that doesn't serve anything. Is it in responsibility to leave it as is, or is it in responsibility to stay in your truth and let them have their truth?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Without participating.
Yes.
At the same level. If I went home and my mom said we're going to church, I'd laugh at her. Don't care if she'd be upset about it or not. I mean, I don't mean rudely laugh at her. I mean, I would be like, you're kidding. Right?
Laugh at the idea.
Yeah, you're kidding,
Yeah.
right? I'm not going to church with you. No. If there was a prevailing reason that she really needed me to be there with her to go to church, I might consider it. But ultimately, unless it was serving some immense value, I couldn't do it if it was going to support her illusions, because that's not in integrity to me.
And she might be missing out on what she could learn in this lifetime. I'm finding that with my folks, is that they just haven't thought about the things that led me to my deconversion. They just haven't thought about those things. And so I'm not on a mission to try to sway them
right
out of what they got. But if what they got isn't, if they're not comfortable in their skin, and they're worried all the time, and they're not really at the bounty of the fruits of the Spirit at the table every day, then it's, and they wonder why I have a lot of peace and tranquility, and I it's not an easy conversation by any means, but I think it's a necessary one for the evolution of consciousness of the masses, is people that they love and respect, the sons and the daughters out there who are working their magic, working their light in the way that they know how to do it, and they're shining light into new conversation. And so I've been held literally like in a witch hunt in my family by my sister, my feet to the fire in front of my parents, because I had told her that I wasn't into that, just didn't ascribe to those tenets anymore. And she wanted me, she was screaming at me in a family meeting. Wow. to tell my parents that I wasn't still on that, like just blood curdling, just angry, and it was just such a bizarre thing. And it was so cool, because my parents, I wasn't expecting it. They're just like, well, what do you want us to do? You want us to, they were asking, yeah, like, what do you want us to do about that? You want us to kick him out? Do you want us to refuse his love? He's really good at that. And he's my mom told my sister that I was the most Christ-like person in the family, even after she vetted me as as an agnostic or whatever it was. But and that did not go well with my sister. And anyway, lots of drama, lots of crazy stuff. But it's got my parents and I on a page where we can be completely raw and open with each other. And they probably wish at night, maybe they're praying that I'll see the light again or something. But they know exactly where I stand, and they have mad respect for how I work my life and my dedication to service and on and on. They really appreciate all that stuff. But I feel like they've evolved as a result of me having a crucial conversation about something that was taboo and something. And so,
Absolutely.
and learning not to pretend necessarily to be true to my values of what I have in my life now, but knowing which card to play at which time, but completely being authentic. And I was asked to go to a baptism of my niece, and I didn't go. I don't, to me that would have been a pretend game that would have it just would have been, I would not have been comfortable in my skin.
Yeah.
And I see these children, these beautiful children, who get lost in the slipstream of someone's taking care of all this for me. And they're not really learning where the rubber's meeting the road for their daily struggle of how they could be more proactive and how they're framing their consciousness, how their stories that they're telling them, the narrative of their daily life can be completely swept away by this supernatural agency. And I think that can get that can get very destructive for kids.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you think the worst that would happen, Jeff, if you weren't pretending? I
don't know that I said that I was pretending.
You did say pretending, but
let's put it back
okay,
in context.
Yeah.
What do you remember about me using the word pretending?
Well, you got to pretend, so you don't get in trouble or you don't get kicked out, or you just kind of keep the peace by pretending a little bit, is what I heard.
Well, so if we use Christmas as an example,
yeah,
I'm in the process of I'm not celebrating Christmas any longer, and I actually left the country this year for Christmas, and went down and hung out with my buddy Kirk down in Baja.
Oh yeah,
and had a marvelous time. And the point wasn't to go down there and do a gift exchange, or it
Right.
was just like I'm not doing that.
Bye-bye.
That's really interesting. Yeah,
That's been a transition that's been going on for the last 3 or 4 years in my relationship. Is I was the guy that I would break out the decorations. I love decorating for Christmas. I love turning the house into this beautiful place and doing that whole
shrine,
thing.
Yeah.
And then it all just went away.
Mm-hmm.
And I went, this is just... I couldn't find any joy in it anymore. And to the point now where if you want it, you get to do it, because I'm not participating in that way. We talk about gifts, but it's fascinating to observe that change in the process and knowing that in the end, I don't want to play there. And this is actually, for me, this was the first year that I actually got through the entire season without real serious energetic rub. Because for me, that season, from right after October moves into November, it just gets so heavy and dark for me.
Yeah.
And I just I just want to hide. I don't want to be.
So when you were talking about the worst that would happen if you weren't, and we can use whatever word is comfortable at this point, but instead of pretending, let's just say if you didn't pretend with certain people, what do you think the worst would happen? Do you feel like you would be ostracized? Do you feel like you might be kicked out of some club or something in the family?
No, it isn't that. It's just being the only one is tough.
Mm-hmm.
And the lack of desire on other people of really wanting to understand why I don't want to do it anymore. It's just I'd just be written off as a rebel or unloving, or he doesn't give a shit about anything anymore.
Midlife
which
crisis.
Is mostly true. And it's so how is that a problem?
Yeah.
It's please don't get me anything for Christmas, and don't expect anything from me.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, why do we do gift giving? I mean, are you really trying to recreate the three wise men, the magi that were, it's like, really? Or is that what you're trying to recreate?
Yeah.
And what does that have to do with anything? I mean, be honest. It's about commercialism.
Yeah.
Can you just freaking be honest about that? We're good Americans by going to Walmart and buying shit for people that they don't need with it, and
Made
it
in
all
China.
ends up in the landfill
Yeah.
3 years from now.
Yeah.
Consumerism, consumerism.
So
You touched on something that I wanted to talk a little more about, because I hadn't thought about it in these terms before, but my entire family has evolved because of my process. I mean, where my parents, I put them through the ringer. I mean, because not only did they have, the gay boy to deal with, then they had the one that was out there on the far reaches of wherever.
Dancing with Satan.
And fortunately, it didn't go there.
Good.
But I remember because when I moved to Arizona and we opened the center in Arizona, at the time I was really sick, and that was the first time my parents had come out. Actually, my entire family came out because I thought I was going to die. But that was an interesting time, because it was the first time that when I took my dad and my mom, particularly my dad, and we took my dad and brothers out to Sedona, one of the first things that he remarked on was feeling the vibration in the ground.
wow.
And I went, "Who are you?
Yeah.
Who are you?" And that was a catalyst, I think, because the evolution that he has gone through, it's just remarkable. He hasn't lost everything of some of the not so great things, but the fact that I have consistently stayed my truth and stayed my path has kind of dragged them all along to some degree or another. And I think you were talking about the same thing in some form or fashion. Just standing in your truth and continuing to walk forward, kicking and screaming, they're still going to come forward to some whatever degree they can.
And if you're living in peace and happiness and compassion, and I had been taught that people who didn't ascribe to this belief system, that they were just really lost, awful people. And I think seeing someone with a smile on his face that's aging relatively well and has a heart for service, and I think that's like that kind of proof is in the pudding. It's
Strives to live his joy.
yeah, and there are people in the family. The happier I am on this island, and I like that you said it, because it is vulnerable to be the only one, because we are. It's in our DNA to be part of a clan. We crave that tribalism, not tribalism, but I guess we might crave that too. But the idea that this is my people, and I want to be with them. I want to know them. I want them to know me. And there's just absolutely zero curiosity, and it's just judgment. It's just a lot of judgment, and that's sticks and stones kind of thing. I get it, but when it's your core people, it's it can get a little lonely sometimes.
A lot of times.
Being dedicated to the things, the tenets of what makes my life work for me, causes me to have moments where the wind blows a certain way, and I can feel a little bit of loneliness sometimes. I feel alone a lot, but I feel really comfortable in that. But there are occasions where I can feel a little bit of loneliness of craving that tribe. And I think it's beautiful that when we can be that change and let the family kind of do what they want to do. And man, there's people in my family that romanticize about getting to know and better and all this kind of stuff, but I don't think I would have any interest in them at all if I met them on the street. They're not that interesting people. They're not great dinner guests. They're parroting very predictable things from their day and from their church and from their work, and it's just like there's not a lot of ideas being discussed. And that just absolutely, I would rather be out in nature. I'd rather be listening to the wind than and feeding my soul that way than just being part of something for the sake of being part of something that's not really feeding me. That's actually worse than being alone. Does that resonate?
I would tell my mom, my dad and I, I'm really clear he didn't like me from the get-go.
Pops.
My dad.
Yeah.
And that's always been my perception. And then when I came out, he beat me up. Or when he found out I was gay, beat me up. But
He just beat the gay out of you.
he's going to beat the gay out of me. No, I mean, it was obvious what it was. It was, the whole thing was, I won't have this in my house and, all this just stupidity. But the thing that was interesting for me, because we went for many, I didn't speak to him for 15 years.
Wow.
Where we didn't have a relationship. And my mother was constantly, and they were divorced by then, and my mom was constantly in the reach out. You got to get, blah, blah, blah.
To you,
blah, blah. Yeah.
about your pop.
And I got really, really, really clear to your point about family. And I said, if he was not my father, I would have nothing to do with him.
Exactly.
He would have no point in my life at all.
Yeah.
So I get it. He's my blood because I was birthed and he's my parent. But that's over.
Yeah.
That's done. I got born. I got raised. I'm on my own. It's over. So if there's a relationship, then it has to be met with a relationship, and it's not
respect
about,
and dignity that you both
about,
deserve. Absolutely.
Anything else. But anyway, I don't want to go down. That's a whole other channel that kind of takes us away from where we were going about fear. So let's bring it back.
Let's go back to Columbus for a moment.
Let's go back to Columbus.
Yeah. In Christopher Columbus's diary, of which I have not read, I've only come across the information through historians that have spent their life learning about him, what could be learned, that was documented, is that he had UFO sightings in his voyage from Spain to...
Is that right?
Toward the Americas, and that believed that he was being guided by them.
Wow.
And you've never heard this before.
Never heard it.
It's again, that's that suppression of what apparently wasn't that hard of information to find, but it just doesn't fit with the model that we want to talk about.
Yeah.
And going straight from that example to the length and effort that the Vatican has gone to suppress 8-foot-tall skeletons, skeletal remains with 24-inch long craniums. Photographs have been taken. Anthropologists, their life's work was devoted to locating it, documenting it, studying it, and just completely set aside and doesn't exist, and you're going to be discredited. Smithsonian, same thing. The same sorts of beings have been archived and stored and housed, and you can't go see it. You can't go find it. So it's that same. We can't resonate with that story, and it's like it's everywhere. If you just go up to the Los Angeles Museum of Natural History and go into the art section and the jewelry. There's so many pieces of jewelry that have helmeted beings in the jewelry. There's so many pieces of artwork that
ancient
have
stuff, you mean?
Helmeted beings flying around in flying carpets, magic carpets, and these small spacecraft. And it's like, people don't just make that stuff up. I'm going to do this and just, let's
and it's
going to
be replete in every culture across the world.
So at some level, you can't deny that. You cannot deny that exists. Yet you're a conspiracist if you talk about it.
Right.
And and it makes people afraid. Apparently, we have to pretend that doesn't exist. And then we must do it because we like the version of our story. Santa Claus is a better story than Columbus being guided on his journeys by an alien. Same thing with the Mormons.
Joseph Campbell? I mean, not Joseph Campbell.
Joseph Smith.
Smith.
Yeah.
I like Joseph Campbell.
He talked about being guided, having alien encounters, and his work being inspired and guided that way. And, you know, it's not that I'm trying to promote that or anything else. It's just fascinating that we seem to be at a tipping point where more people are willing to acknowledge that there is more going on than, you know, why do we have to be this small little bubble that's just hoarding here's a who, you know, on this little planet of speck out there somewhere, and that's all our story can be. And it's ridiculous.
Well, I think it's a couple things I want to throw into this. One is it's remarkable to me as we have this conversation how challenging it is, even within the context of this conversation, to not be hooked to parts of the story. You know, that as we've gone back and forth and talked, we've each come across little hooks. You know, little places where, yeah, but at Christmas I gotta kind of blend in. You know, I gotta, you know, when I'm at home I gotta do the Jesus thing a little bit. You know, and the reason for bringing that out and wanting to talk about that for a second is largely to have people understand that the process of choosing to step into your own authenticity or choosing to walk the path of personal transformation, it's not an easy process.
Not at all.
It's not. It doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be debilitating, but it's important to recognize that even as much work as each of us has done individually in our own experience, there's still parts of that mass conscious that wants to get in and kind of keep you playing, keep you hooked in, keep you, you know, and that's going to go on for a while. That's part of the process. It's learning to be able to see it and go, yeah, that's not me. That's something else, and being able to leave that there and still continue to focus here.
Mm-hmm.
You know, instead of it being on you. You know, like I think some of the description that Timothy used was really apt, where it's you feel like, especially with the religious stuff, it's so on you. It's so like it's like cocoa butter that's been rubbed on so thick that you can't get it off your skin. You know, it's like
Right.
Napalm.
Agent Orange. You can't. Yeah, you can't get it. You can't get it off. And the thing is that it comes off as you understand more deeply, and as you understand more deeply, there's a tipping point. There's a balance point that comes because you begin to recognize that not everyone has that perspective. So you have to honor people where they are, and still desire to, just by being who you are.
Right.
You know, by showing up in your own life and being who you are, that changes everything. Because when they see you at peace, when they see you living your joy, when they see the life that you create that is unfettered from so much of the nonsense, and they go, wait,
What's guiding that?
what's making that
Yeah.
happen? Yep. So even they may not embrace all of it, but they'll embrace some of it. It'll
And
begin to
it
open
almost,
doorways.
and I think with my family, there are people who have resentment for my happiness because they are in a mindset to suffer. They're entrained to have a suffering as a default, and they're having to jump through all these hoops and do this whole rigmarole, and I'm living a life that I design, and I'm happy doing it, and I'm not having. It's almost like they're working for a corporation, and I get to be, you know, spiritually they're working for, you know, IBM in a cubicle or something, and they're grinding it out under fluorescent lights, and I'm getting to just be wherever I want to be on the planet, on a beach or on a mountaintop or in a desert, and just feeling all the things I think they really want to feel about life and comfort and peace, and I've had it expressed to me that they resent that. They resent that.
I call that the fear of selfishness.
Right.
Because that's part of the fear indoctrination. That's you can't be selfish is not cool. Selfish is a bad thing, and that's what's going to send you to hell, and that's what's going to take you out of God's favor. And the reality is, without it, you'll never make a change. You'll never go there because it's imminently selfish and necessary selfish. Mm-hmm. To decide to walk the path of personal development, to walk the path of growth and change and transformation. Because if you're not, you won't get there from here.
Mm-hmm.
I'm on a path right now of making another change that is getting some pushback, and that is giving up my birthday. I'm
Giving up what?
My birthday. I'm not going to celebrate my next year birthday.
Ooh.
I'm not going to celebrate my birthday anymore. I don't want to do the count up of reminding myself how old I'm
Chronologically,
getting, and
exactly.
then having to frickin' be that old.
Right.
And you can't fake your way through that one. If you're going to celebrate birthdays and people ask you how old you are, your subconscious, unconscious mind is going to frickin' be that old. And I want to forget how old I am.
I think that's beautiful.
But I know it's going to be just like Christmas, where people are going to want to send me cards and send me stuff, and we just want to think about you. We're just happy to celebrate your life. It's like, okay, well, that's fine, but it doesn't have a frickin' number anymore. It doesn't have a number. And they're not any special ones. Because like some people do, like, if it ends in a 0, it's a really big one.
That was a big deal for me, and it's interesting that you chose that particular one, because when I turned 50, it was the only birthday. Because normally birthdays for me are like whatever, let's move on. But for some reason, 50 for me was a big deal. I don't know why. I care less one way or the other, but I wanted to be acknowledged for my 50th birthday, right? I told Michael, this is my 50th birthday. Figure it out. Make it special. Do something. My 50th birthday was it wasn't a complete bust, but it was not anything near what I was looking for. And it was a realization. It was like, why is that his responsibility? but it was just fascinating that I couldn't pull that together, and it was a big deal to stop and go, wow. You just really can't arbitrarily decide this is the important one.
Right.
It's like if you're not celebrating, then you don't carry that energy. So, boy, it created a lot of disappointment for about a day or two.
I think we did a decent job of. I think we could do many visitations on religion and how that all shows up. But what are some other areas of mass consciousness that we might be experiencing? Education?
Well, most of our history, most of the history in the way it's presented, it's not hero worship. It's what is that called when you create a story about people that's far grander than anything they ever were? But all of the faces throughout history, particularly with this country, that the stories of who those people were and what they did was all geared toward what they contributed and not who they were as people.
Right.
And that even their contributions are given huge attributions which are largely fabricated or made much bigger. You know, I was thinking about it in terms of like our government, and what was it got me thinking about how we've structured. Oh, we have a Supreme Court, and I actually heard those words it was like I heard them for the first time today, and I went, Supreme Court. That sounds just like Roman times. That sounds just like so many other, you know, the Caliphate, or wasn't the Caliphate? Is that what they were called? The Jewish, it was in the Bible. The ones that wear the hats and judged everything.
The Pharisees,
Pharisees, or
Yeah.
whatever they were. Yeah, but the same idea that that like a Supreme Court, we created this body that assesses the rightness, the constitutionality of our actions, based against a piece of paper that was written by a bunch of men who were trying to create something positive. They were trying to create but even all of that, you kind of go, how much, where does that, if you dissect each of those stories, they don't hold up well. They're missing large swaths of information. They're missing, you know, big pieces of connective tissue, because the story of how it's Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving is another good one. I mean, Christmas is just insane. Jesus was born on Christmas, except he wasn't.
Yeah, when the shepherds were watching their flocks by night in the frickin' wintertime.
In the wintertime.
Yeah, but they weren't out there. So the Thanksgiving is an interesting one too, that it's a crappy meal. Nobody likes it, but everybody cooks it. And, you know, now there's at least 3, if not 4 football games on that start out at like 9 o'clock in the morning and run all the way through, so you never have to talk to each other and keep pouring that wine for everybody. Let's not have any real, you know, communal family connection going on.
And now you can shop before Thanksgiving or after Thanksgiving now.
From the comfort of your own toilet.
Well, you can go stuff yourself silly for 3 hours, and then you can go shopping. But it has nothing to do with commercialization or anything. It's a spiritual, deeply powerful period.
I think it's
But it keeps that whole,
out of all the
whole construct
holidays,
of
the
calendar.
idea of Thanksgiving makes the most sense to me. And I think it would be cool if I'm ever the head of a household. I think getting people in nature and everybody give up your cell phones, and you know, we're gonna be here in this cabin, or you know, we're just gonna no TV, board games, and you know, conversation, and just work it out and work it through, and not being, you know, no one gets to be bored, or maybe it's a good thing that you're bored. Get creative. Go make something happen. Let's figure this thing out. But I think I have an uncle. I won't say his name, but when I'd go, I don't have very many uncles, so if any family know, they'll know who I'm talking about. But I'd go to his house to hang out with him, and the TV would be on, and there would be a point where I'd say, you know, I can come back, or I can go if you're fit. He's like, I'm not really watching it, and it's louder than our conversation. And at the time, I wasn't watching TV, and I certainly wasn't watching commercials, and it was just this strange, genuine simulate of how we were being this uncle and nephew, but I only had just a portion of his attention, and I find that to be.
So did he.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So, in this same, with this same uncle, there was a time where there's a member of our family who's quite young and very overweight, and the parents aren't. They're happily overweight. And there's this 5-year-old girl. This 5-year-old girl who's got. There was a fire built, and there were s'mores, and s'mores are awesome. But she has, from head to toe, she's covered with chocolate and marshmallows, and she's just walking. She's getting dirt all over everything, and it's just, and they just think it's the cutest thing in the world. And I'm thinking, and she gets made fun of at school, and all this, and I'm just thinking, it's so hard for me. Like, I want to be engaged. This is another mass consciousness thing, that you're supposed to go and eat really bad and destroy yourself, for what end, I'm not exactly sure, but a lack of consciousness around what we're doing to this only temple we got in this lifetime.
Well, if you're unworthy and God thinks you're a piece of crap, why bother worrying about what you're putting in it? Why
It's
bother
true.
to deal with it? Because
Become a marshmallow.
Become a marshmallow. It's exactly what I was thinking when I was watching her. Just and so she asked me. She's like, "Do you want some?" She this dirty, sticky hand with chocolate and everything. She's like, "Do you want some?" And I said, "No." And she goes, "Well, why not?" And she's a pretty good reader. And I said, "Why don't you read what's in that?" And she was sitting there trying, and of course she couldn't, because I don't think anybody can.
Yeah.
It's a long
5 years old.
And
Wow.
then the mom tried to read it, and anyway, that's another area of mass consciousness I think is really funny, is that we're supposed to injure ourselves, Christmas, indulging, spending more than getting ourselves into debt, going beyond our means to have a moment, and then watching children. Oh my gosh, watching kids that don't appreciate a thing, and they're just bored, and someone put some thought into something, and it's just because the parents year round give them everything that they could possibly want. They want for nothing. They literally want for nothing, and it's just very much the same way. One of my first times at a casino, I watched this. Probably, I don't mean to pick on heavyset people. This lady was probably 700 or 800 pounds, sitting in front of a slot machine, and I was all bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. I was probably 18 or something, and I walked in, and she pulled the lever right as I'm walking by, and like $7,000 worth of coins came out. And I was just thinking it was so cool. It was loud, and all these lights, and everybody's around and clapping and everything. Her expression didn't change. Mm-hmm. It's she's thinking, okay, that's $7,000 going toward my $100,000 debt, and in her mind there was no joy. It was just a monotonous rut, and there was just no pleasure. And I was thinking, that looked like a lot of fun to win all that, but she couldn't get there because there was no balance. That's all she knew, and that's how she was living her life. But that's how I felt when I tried to buy gifts for kids in our family whose parents had just spoiled them like crazy. Some good hard work. Some good hard work would be a really good. I think every kid needs to know how to clean a toilet and a pan. And I've had children in my house that didn't know how to clean a dish at 13 years old. Didn't know how to clean up after themselves. Had no idea. No idea how to reheat something. That's a mass consciousness. I think that there's a lot of parents who feel like they were over-parented. Parents were really strict and maybe went over the top a little bit in their mind. And so their idea, and it happens a lot here in California, is that, okay, that pendulum was way over here. I worked my tail off. I had all these chores to do. And so, you know what? Here's the keys to the kingdom to these kids when they're young. And that pendulum swings 180 degrees from sick. It's still sick. And that pendulum swings, and these kids just don't have any frame of reference about the value of a dollar or what it means to value something, take care of something.
But isn't that really what's going to help potentially break down some of the process? The calendar, we were asking about things that contribute to the mass consciousness. The calendar in and of itself is a stimulus of the mass consciousness, because everything from the perspective of consumerism is driven on a consumer calendar. If you think about, and now it's crazy because it's so entrenched, that come August you start seeing Halloween. By September you start seeing a little of Thanksgiving and Halloween. As soon as Halloween's over, it's all Thanksgiving and Christmas comes in, and now and come past the first of the year, you have now the Super Bowl has become a holiday. So everything's built up to the end of January so that there's a Super Bowl, and then there's March Madness, and there's
Valentine's Day,
and there's Easter, and there's Memorial Day, and it just goes on, and it keeps people in this shoot of the next thing, the next thing you got to spend money on, the next thing you got to get ready to go do,
have your party, and
and in order to be effective, but that and it's all perpetuating that fear of unworthiness, that consistent, never-ending story of you're not good enough, you're not worthy. But if you spend money and if you buy people nice things, you might buy some, you might get some redemption before you go to hell.
What are some ways that we have found effective measures of helping people deal with their unworthiness? How did we deal with our own unworthiness?
Well, it comes back to the original question, which was how do each of us deal with coming to terms with that mass consciousness? How do we in our own experiences address those things that we know are not true, that we know don't serve us or anybody else, but it's not our job to change other people. It's only our job to deal with us. Mm-hmm. And it's only through that we can be the example, because otherwise it doesn't make any sense anyway.
Right.
That's really what my hope tonight is, that we would be able to kind of have some something people can grasp a little more than just the ideas of this stuff. Because this stuff is important, and it gets deep, and it can, that whole conspiracy thing, but it's still the reality of our experience, and it's not designed to create peace and happiness and joy and transformation. It's designed to create fear and unworthiness and grind, and if you're lucky, you might have some success. That's the really criminal thing to me. You were talking earlier about how your family sees you go on trips, and you're on this mountain, and you're at this lake, and you're doing this thing, and I have a very similar type of thing where you're out doing life.
Yeah,
you're just
enjoying yourself.
What is it?
What is he so happy about?
Right. Because it's entrenched into everything from what kind of job you should have. The education system, is another complete. To me, complete. It's another consumerism game.
Yeah,
that it's. Do I think that it's valuable? I don't know. I don't know if I have a good answer to that, because it's.
But you'd much rather have a surgeon that went to school than a surgeon who didn't.
For something specialized like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
just to standardize schools.
But on the flip side, the doctors don't they know about the systems, but they don't have any better answers than anybody else does. They have ideas based on what they learned in a textbook or in doing anatomy, but because there's so much left out of our understanding of the human experience, i.e., energy, and the emotional component of what creates disease, and the spiritual components of what create disease, that they're guessing. Mm-hmm. They're guessing,
and maybe even doing more harm.
Yes,
absolutely.
So how I don't know. Yeah, so as surgeries for something like that specialized, sure. I want them to know that if I'm going to get my appendix cut out, it's not in my thigh.
Yeah.
I definitely would prefer that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But past that, you go, where do you go from here? That you go to a doctor thinking that the doctor's going to help you get well. That's not the doctor's job. I mean, he thinks it is, I think. But how is that even really true when the drug companies manage and control so much of what they're able to do and not do? And the medical establishment does the same thing. You can't think out of the box. You're not encouraged to think out of the box. The box is this, and I remember back when we first started the center in Sedona, back what was it, the early '90s, late '80s. If you said the word naturopathic physician, people would lose their minds. What is that wacky crap? That's not a doctor.
Yeah.
What is that? What are you going to rub some flowers on it and make it better? That kind of thing. And you're like,
Oh yeah.
Even osteopathic medicine.
Osteopathic. Yep.
Yeah, it's
That was also
a lot closer to an MD than an ND, but still not really respected like an MD is. Very narrow-minded.
Yeah.
Focus on all that. And it's really about managing illness. It's not about wellness.
yes.
We don't promote wellness because that's bad business.
That's right.
That'll drive the doctors out of business if we got well. Certainly the pharma companies. So that's a mass consciousness thing, is that everybody needs to be on a pill. And watch any television around the holidays, it's largely this pill and that pill, and talk to your doctor about
for our
this.
holidays. It's they actually have it down to time slots because they know what time certain people watch certain programs, and so they fill those time slots with pills.
So here's a story that I've been pondering for the last half hour or so. This idea of why we would buy certain stories. We like them better than the truth. We make stuff up that we can live with better than the truth. I don't know if this is true, but it was my truth once upon a time that to think of myself as an American and throwing a word like patriot next to that word American and promoting democracy and freedom over communism or socialism or some other more oppressive system is kind of where I came from, out of that part of the belief system. But the reality is it seems to be at least in our history books, that a group came from Europe and landed somewhere on the East Coast, and we call them pilgrims, and we respect the heck out of them, and they got the natives sick, and the natives are like, you guys can't be here, you're messing us all up.
Yeah.
So that didn't go over so well, so we took our guns and killed them, and it just kept moving, and we took these peace-loving people and just freaking eradicated them. That's not a cool story at all. That's a barbaric, vicious story. And you get into the whole Custard, the Battle of the Little Bighorn, and then to make matters worse, we do this whole plantation thing of going to the east coast of Africa and capturing a bunch of black folks that were not farmers themselves. They were hunter warriors. They had pitchforks, or they didn't have pitchforks. They had spears and bows and arrows, and put them on ships and bring them over here and make them tobacco farmers. And then somebody says that's not cool, so we turn them loose and say, oh yeah, you can go get an education, even though you don't learn the same way most other people learn, a different style of learning. And so we deem them as uneducated and ignorant, and so they turn to a life of crime and a gangster thug mentality just to survive. That's our story. And it didn't just stop all the way to the West Coast. And let's push up into Alaska. And let's go take, we'll eradicate the Eskimos too and their way of life. and we'll just rip apart our national parks and we'll drill oil wells and just that's our story.
Yeah.
That's the real story. But you know, if you're an American and you're a patriot, it's like, oh, we got to have a strong military. We have to have a strong presence to, you know, take care of the national policing of the planet, to make sure there's not pirates and robbing ships, and that our shipping lanes are free and open. And it's like, it's all just about money.
Yep.
It's about money. Money.
Yeah.
It was a very interesting program I watched. I don't know if you all see Vice News or if you've ever watched it, but it's a pretty
HBO.
fascinating program. But they did a story on Putin's re-election. But the perspective they took was to talk to the people in Russia who voted for Putin, and it was actually a conversation about who would you vote, who are you voting for, and why. Categorically, Putin. Categorically, people, and these people were not in any way, shape, or form. They did not come across as coerced. They didn't come across as anything other than us sitting in Russia.
Yeah.
And their whole thing was, why do you think we're not free? She actually said it in the thing. She's like, we're free. We can come and go as we choose. And he seems to continue to promote that. So their perspective is they have freedom. And their guy ain't so bad. And you go, wow, that's not the perspective we have.
Right.
But I talked to a friend. Who moved from San Diego to Lausanne in Switzerland. Lausanne, is that right? Lausanne, something like that. And I said, I sent him a note, and I said, I'm really curious. What do they think of our situation now that you're there for a while? What's the perspective that they have of Trump and our situation? And he said, they just laugh about it. They think they think it's completely ridiculous, and they cannot figure out why or how the man got elected. They just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
So they laugh about it. And I was like, that is to me, that was fascinating. They don't have any stuff. It's like they're doing their thing, we're doing our thing. But again, the mass conscious thing, we are so entrenched and ingrained to believe that we're supposed to be the best and the only thing going on the planet that's going to save people's lives.
Yeah.
And yet the people that are living, I'm not saying in every corner, but for the most part, most people are free and doing what they want to do. They get up in the morning, they go do their job, they do their thing, they go they go to dinner, they go, whatever they do. So this, I'm not sure where I was going with that, except that it's part of the fear game is compartmentalization. Obviously, that's a tactic that I think has been around forever. So if you can compartmentalize people into certain boxes and things and limit their perception, so they can't. If you can make Americans think that Mexicans are bad, then Mexicans are bad. Because you can limit the perception of what people see and what they know, and feed them what you want them to know or what you think they should know, and that becomes their knowledge base for what that is. And so this whole race of people that are extraordinary people are now looked at as even sub-American. And you go, what is that? Why? Why do we need to keep compounding fear on top of fear on top of fear? Well, because the controls are starting to not work anymore. But for me, I want to, I just want to continue to encourage people to step into their own truth. Step into their own experience of believe what you see. Don't make up something, or don't buy into the story just because that's the story. When you see it and it doesn't gel, start, like you said, question everything.
Yeah.
One of the best things that helped me is growing up the way that I did. There was so much judgment, and I didn't even know how much judgment I had people kind of reflecting back to me that I was being judgmental, and I'm thinking, well, it's just the way it is, and that's just, I was very convincing of my
Rightness.
Yeah, about rightness. But I think when we have an opportunity to trade our judgment for curiosity, that's been a real linchpin for me in getting more and more of a sense of empowerment around the things that have begun to set me free. Is just being curious about things and what opens up if I just. In Japan a few years ago, they did a study, and we always hear that we're supposed to take a deep breath. When something's going on, take a deep breath. Actually, it's 6 deep breaths. It actually will change our brain chemistry and our blood pressure to take 6 deep breaths. So I began to become extraordinarily aware of the sensation on the front of my body when I was hearing something. And anything between my pubic bone and my chin, if I felt tension, restriction, a tightening anywhere in that space, I knew that I was triggered by something. And if I was triggered by something, I had zero business saying anything because I was not present with that moment. I could really do a good job of helping someone believe that they were the reason why I got triggered, right? And I did that a lot, and I was great at it. and it's a sad thing. I used some trickery, and I didn't realize I was doing it. So I've learned to just be extraordinarily curious about things I don't understand. And if I have any tightness on the front of my body as I'm exploring something, it's not time for me to make an assessment. It's not time for me to contribute or try to solve anything. I need to be with that. I need to acknowledge what it is that I'm thinking, feeling, and doing in that moment. Usually what I'm feeling. Most people that come in and get on my table, they know that something's not right, but they can't identify the emotion, and they act like it's just I'm asking them to write a manifesto. I'm like, no, I'm going to leave you on the table for a little bit, and I just want you to breathe, and I want you to pay attention to the nature of your thinking. And so I'll come in and ask how that went, and it's really, you can tell a lot about how that goes. But most people are a little flabbergasted. Either they fall asleep or they're flabbergasted by how much is running through their system. And most people are unaware of what they're feeling at any given moment. They know something's not right. They know that there's like an agitation, but they don't sit with the emotion. So back to your original question, a way that I work with that is being aware of what I'm feeling in a moment and being really compassionate about that. And see if it reminds me of other times in my life when I felt that way, and when did I first feel that way, and can I just learn to breathe it and love it all exactly as it is with radical acceptance, So
let's bridge the gap between between judgment and curiosity, because they don't. That's not one step. You don't go from judgment to curiosity. You can't do that in one step.
I can't?
You can after practice.
Okay.
But for people listening that want to understand that process,
right?
You can't go from judgment.
So how do we?
to curiosity.
How
do you in your own experience? How do you?
The very first thing is recognizing that if I'm tight anywhere on the front of my body,
okay,
that if I'm judging, I'm usually triggered. There's some little unconscious trigger that's going on.
Yeah.
So becoming aware of my breath and what it feels like to breathe naturally when things are good and hawks are playing in the sky and butterflies and rainbows and ocean waves and good stuff's flowing.
Stay focused. You're diverging.
What I'm saying is getting into a space where I know what my body feels like when I'm at peace.
Yes.
And so yoga's been a big contributor for that. Probably the biggest contributor for me. So getting that clean slate of my baseline peace of mind, peace in my body, and then recognizing when I'm in a situation, how am I breathing? What am I feeling when I'm exchanging with this person?
So are you saying that when judgment is present, there is a negative physical experience.
Absolutely.
Every
It's not a
single time.
It's not a negative physical experience, but it's a shortening. It's a constriction. It does,
What's wrong?
It's
with
a charge.
What's wrong with calling it a negative physical experience? It's not pleasant, correct?
I don't think it's unpleasant to someone who isn't practicing. That isn't really doing their level best to the average person, people judge and it makes them actually feel good, I guess is what I'm getting at. Some people feel great when they're judging other people. It makes them feel
They feel righteous.
Yeah. So there's like that piety and that indignation. That
But is that real? Is that ultimately? See, I don't find that there's any good feeling in there. Righteousness tries to cover up the feeling.
I agree.
So I'm just
Yeah,
and
so-
I want to
so-
elucidate that because it's important. It's important minutia, but it's important because people that are trying to who know that they have judgment, like because we
So
all do.
what I was getting at is that how I do that is that I spend time in quietude. I take time to be alone and to understand how I feel when I'm at peace. I listen to good things. I read good things. I'm around people who see me and see my best, and that becomes my baseline. Mm-hmm. And then as I'm out in the world and I'm noticing that I'm aware of where my thoughts are going, and I'll pay attention and go, okay, that used to not feel like a judgment, but if I was on the other end of this thought and this person was doing that, if someone were telling me what I'm thinking about this moment, that probably wouldn't feel that great. Mm-hmm. So I'm in judgment right now, right? So what is it like to just think about what if things were just a little bit different and my family wasn't quite as supportive, or I didn't have this person step up at the right time. I mean, I look at homeless people sometimes and I think that could have been, that under different stars, that could have been me. Mm-hmm. So I guess what I'm getting at is that practicing the art of thinking about what you're thinking about when you're thinking about it, mm-hmm. and being like anaphylactic in your allergy for anything that's just programmed and running. Like if you haven't had an original thought in a while in your day, it might be time to check in, might be time to refresh, and deep, full breaths is a way that I do that. And so, and I also elicit my tribe to just say, hey, I'm noticing that I grew up, in a situation where I was being judged a lot, and in turn I've learned to judge a lot. It's something I'm really working on. Could you please do me the service and let me know if you start to feel any of that from me? Because the last thing I want you to feel, because no one feels good when they're being judged. Mm-hmm. So can you help me? So I'll elicit a response from people that I love and care about, someone I'm dating, a best friend, whatever, a mom, and just having that accountability. And then that, for me, began to be pretty easy to trade that judgment for curiosity. Does that answer your question, or am I still missing something?
No, I think so. I want to liken it to, I have a very similar process, but in a much simpler form, and that is what I tell people is it's really simple. Energy up, energy down. If what you're thinking, doing, or feeling spins your energy up, keep doing it.
Right.
If it spins it down, stop immediately.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter what it is, doesn't matter what's going on, stop, step back.
I like that.
Because if whatever's happening, you don't know enough, you don't have enough information, your information is incorrect. One of those things has to be the case if your energy is spinning down. And so...
But what percentage of the people listening that haven't done a lot of work on themselves would understand what spins it up and spins it down?
Well, you don't have to know what spins it up and spins it down. You have to be conscious of how it's feeling. But your point,
right,
which is
But do you think
in this moment is my?
Do you think most of America?
Am I doing this?
Yeah.
Am I going?
Yeah. Is it a sad face or a happy face?
And it doesn't mean spinning up and spinning down is.
I dig it, but I'm wondering what percentage of our U.S. population do you think thinking about an energetic vortices going up or going down? How many do you think are really I think they feel it, but I don't think that they know how to identify it or name it or claim it. Or
Well, that's why I keep it energy up, energy down. It's a sensation in the body.
Gotcha.
It's a thing you feel.
Right.
Right. You're talking about if it's from here to
Yeah,
here.
yeah,
it's
yeah.
This.
Tightening
So
it up.
there's if I'm gonna drink this cup of tea and it's so tasty, it makes me I automatically go. My body even does that.
Did you like that, by the way? Was it pretty good?
Yeah, it's good.
Okay.
There's a sense of engagement that feels really uplifting.
Yeah.
And it may only be this much.
Right.
But it's different than the feeling of things caving in.
Okay, so if I'm married and I'm a housewife in Nebraska, and my husband is just kind of a brooding guy that's not always real nice, and he's talking to me about work, and he's cussing, and he's got and that energy's taking me down. How do I stop that? If there's 8 feet of snow outside, and you know what I mean? Like this is where where's my happy place?
Oh, good Lord. Well, sorry. So, it still applies.
Sure.
The first step is recognition. The first step is being able to identify.
Right.
Until you can identify successfully, you can't take any action, nor can you make change. So, in
Right.
that circumstance, the first thing is the recognition that the circumstance is causing my energy to go down.
Sure.
So, is there something I can do to change that?
Right.
Well, I can change me, so I can ignore him. I can make a choice or a decision about how I interact with that.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
And it's going to be piece by piece. It's going to be step by step.
Long game.
Right, because that whole dynamic, the unhealthiness of the relationship, if it is indeed unhealthy, the allowance of that energy in the space over a long period of time, the habit that has been built to do that, the first step is recognition. The first step is I've got to be able to see it.
Yeah.
Right? And then once I see it, then I have to identify the habit. I have to identify how does it operate in my life. Well, I notice it here.
Like how's it serving, or
No, just purely observation.
okay.
I've observed this particular point, and this doesn't feel good. So I want to go to a better feeling place. Where's my better feeling place? Well, what makes me feel good, and that woman will have certain things that she does that helps her feel. Maybe she knits. Maybe she does. I don't know. Maybe talking to her daughter on the phone in California, who's living the dream. Whatever. And then start to navigate toward those things that are better feeling, and then you start to see where the differences are. You start to see the gap between what it feels like to feel good and what it feels like to feel bad, and how long you spend feeling bad compared to how long you spend feeling good. And once you begin to see that, you can then begin to make choices about that.
Absolutely.
Right? And so it's sort of like I was saying before, where you can't go from judgment to curiosity. There's steps that have to go. It's the same thing. This process requires the separation from mass consciousness doesn't happen because you decide you're not going to do it anymore. It's too entrenched. You've been trained since before you were born. In your mother's womb, you were trained into this process. So it's not going to go away just because you wake up one morning and go, oh, I'm not going to do that anymore. You don't know enough about it. You don't understand your relationship to it. That's what transformation is about. That's what our whole evolution is about, is getting conscious of the process. For me, energy up and energy down is a baseline for the beginning of a process. It's the baseline to go, if I don't know anything else, I can stop and go, how do I feel right now? Am I engaged, or am I going, I want to kill myself? I'm kind of doing the I want to kill myself thing. Okay, not a place I want to be here.
Yeah.
Step back.
Yeah.
Right? Those are basic, easy steps that you can take. So to answer your question, but I love I love that piece about feeling your way into it, because that's.
It's one of the most important things that.
But you have to have that sort of objective observer place to be able to observe, to look at that.
I think that's lacking in our society, is an understanding of how to access our emotion and really get a sense of what we're feeling, and having space for that. And having space in a conversation where someone might just say, you know what, my nervous system is really overwhelmed right now and I don't feel safe. I've actually said that to people in the last couple of years, and like people that wanted to hang out or something, and just say, I like the idea in my mind, but my nervous system is just like having a little bit of a time with that. It doesn't feel safe to me. Can we circle back on that? And it's crazy when people hear my certainty about that. Mm-hmm. They respect it. They absolutely respect it. And we can't really argue with the nervous system. But I realized that, Joe Blow in Oklahoma, hearing a response from his wife like, honey, my nervous system, it might not be welcomed with open arms. But back to the curiosity being the higher choice. For me, the way that looks is getting to a place where I just am I'm in a practice of radical compassion and kindness for myself. Mm-hmm. And then I just begin broadening that out into kindness. And where I used to have fear, people that didn't look like me growing up where I did, I was taught to fear them. And it was just such a weird, if it was going against my nature, big time. But there have been times where I have hit up conversation, give someone a nod, how you doing, gentlemen, walking past people that I ended up talking to, and they told me that they planned on jumping me. And then you messed everything up because I felt like a human being when you looked at me. And had I been in my judgment and like trying to be tough and like a lot of people bow up when they're in certain situations, like it's like this guy this Latin man up in Visalia, and his crew, his gang, whatever. He's like, I saw you as a human, and you treated me as a human, and don't keep walking down this street. This isn't a good place for you to be right now, and coming over here. My mom this is her taco joint, and then the next thing you know, they're doing all they can to. It's just the thoughts we carry is a vibration, and that's sent out into our environment. And am I in a loving, kind, beautiful place? And if I'm not, I don't need to be around people. If I'm carrying junk and I'm electing to be around other people just to be distracted, or because I like swiping and being next and next and next, maybe I need to be alone. Maybe I need to figure out what it's going to take for me to have more of a desire for my own company. That's a big one. I know a lot of people that can't stand being alone, and those are
not healthy.
It's not healthy. Mm-hmm. It's really important that we develop that relationship with ourselves. So it might be a good time to chime in on some good books that can help people sort of start to take a look at their. You got any recommendations, Doctor?
No good books.
I was looking.
No good books.
I was looking more for his input at this point.
Oh yeah,
he's been
very patient,
notoriously quiet,
and he's been a trooper coming off of some walking pneumonia. So thank you for being here. Bless your heart. Glad you look good. Looks like you're on the mend.
I'm wondering if we had a consensus of the topic of mass consciousness being more positive or more negative in the way that we've presented it tonight. And a lot of the examples that I think we talked about would be on the more negative side of mass consciousness, where if we go back to the idea of Christmas or this celebration of the Christmas holiday, historically it is also a time of year when people are most charitable, which is a mass consciousness. And it would be nice
Good
if we
point.
could spread load that throughout the year,
Good
that
point.
it wasn't just at that time that we're most charitable, but most nonprofit organizations get the majority of their money, in that month of December. Maybe the mass consciousness behind Thanksgiving is that we do have to have some recognition of family and honoring our family and ancestors and blah, blah, blah. I think it's ironic that the night before Thanksgiving is the night of the year when there's more bar activity than any other night of the year.
Huh.
People go out to the bars and they're getting loaded in preparation for the, oh my gosh, I'm
Blowing
going to
off some
spend all
steam,
day
right?
tomorrow at grandma's house and whatever.
Huh.
So it can go both ways, this mass consciousness thing. But I'm finding myself more and more being disinterested by what's taking place in mass consciousness, if it has to do with Buffy the Vampire Slayer or this zombie apocalypse thing, the fascination in Hollywood with zombies and vampires, and it's like, what the hell is that?
Yeah.
And is it just this big distraction? I don't know what that is, but most
The Bachelor.
yeah. Most news stories hold no interest for me. People ask me if I'm aware of this or that, and they tell me to crawl out of my hole every once in a while and look around and notice what's going on. Like, if I really need to know about it, somehow it shows up for me, and otherwise I get to avoid most of the vibration that goes on with whatever somebody thinks is newsworthy. So I don't know. It's interesting. The idea of this mass consciousness can both be a positive, cool, good thing. But
Is there another example of positive that you can think of? And I'm glad you brought that to my attention. And it feels good to usher some of that back in. But other than like,
well, how about we talked a little bit about birthday too, and the idea that other people want to celebrate
honor
me, or
this, that's true.
This annual thing of, hey, we're glad you're here, kind of thing. That's not necessarily a bad thing.
Huh.
But it does actually program us to frickin' get old, and we somehow feel I got to start getting gray hair at this age, and skin spots, and my bones don't work, and joints, and it's like, why?
Yeah.
It's that we could undo. The birthday card industry might suffer a bit from that.
Right. That was a good.
It might be interesting to explore that further. Actually, as soon as you went there, I thought, where? Because I don't know that I have a thought about the mass consciousness as a positive force. And I guess, the idea of the mass consciousness is it's just the collection of what we continue to think over and over and over and over and over again, and everybody keeps repeating the same process. So ultimately, the mass consciousness could be moved in our favor in that sense if there were enough people thinking and acting
Tipping point, right?
In that tipping point type of framework where it was more about the positive.
The organization of Heart Math has a monthly practice where they'll promote a place on the planet that has a lot of unrest, and the people that are part of the organization will think positive thoughts about bringing peace and content to this particular place on the planet, and then they actually monitor, and they see, did crime go down, did the drug lords not do their dirty work, or that sort of thing. So that's interesting, that there's a little bit of science behind the intentional collection of consciousness aimed at or directed toward a process going on. And they also popularize this idea that it only takes 5,000 people of like mind, not necessarily in a geographic location, but just of like mind, to have enough of an influence for the whole planet. And 5,000 isn't that many people.
100th monkey kind of deal. Do you know about that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, this has been a very interesting conversation. As a recap, we were just diving into this, looking at the video that we talked about, which would be a good thing if you're interested in. It's on YouTube, and it's called, what was it called? Give me a moment. Are We in a Simulated Reality? With Tom Campbell and Bruce Lipton. And we were kind of juxtaposing that with this, with how the mass consciousness works and how that idea of simulated reality and that all things being about energy ultimately, as Jeff pointed out that they talked about, comes back to love, but that how the mass consciousness is sort of structured to fear, and looking at the many ways that takes place, and maybe at another point we can talk more in depth about ways to shift that more to the positive. But
Absolutely.
Right now it's, this is about identification, I think, and
Mm-hmm.
helping to see that ultimately what you want to recognize is that the fear is never useful. So if that's where it's at, then we got to take a step back again, energy up, energy down, or as he's saying, if you're feeling it up the front of your body and it doesn't feel good, you got to stop and take a step back and assess,
6 breaths at least.
assess your place and assess your feeling and assess your experience and assess your judgment. What's happening for you in that time? And then once you have that information, you can then start making other choices and other decisions, or investigating, or using the curiosity to learn more or understand more about what's going on, so that you can make different choices and those different choices that cause your energy to go back
And
up.
something that really helps me with that very thing is simply asking, what if this were all easy? Like every once in a while, if something's kind of befuddling and I'm in a tiny quagmire or something, I'll just think, well, what if this was easy? What if I was watching the film and then I just got to see the next scene going effortlessly into something more interesting, more elevating, more inspired? So, what if it were all easy is a really good question to ask from time to time too. What if this were easy? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Good stuff.
Yeah.
Anything you guys would like to contribute in closing our conversation tonight?
No, not at all.
Thank you all very much. Thank you for listening. Another
Nice
great
having you
evening,
guys
great
here
evening.
again.
Catch y'all next week.
All right. Take care, guys.
Thank you.